Mandy stared at the well-dressed man standing in front of her, his words still echoing in her head. "Amanda Black, you have been served," he said with a hint of sadness. The office fell into a deathly silence, and for a moment, Mandy felt as if time had stopped. In her hand was the death sentence to her 5-year marriage. With a soft sob, she collapsed into the chair, clutching the newspaper. Slowly, the office began to come back to life. Stares, whispers, and disapproving looks started to grow. Suddenly, Mandy heard a soft voice nearby. "Mandy, let's go," Kit said gently, taking her friend by the hand and helping her to her feet. "Let's take you to the conference room, away from this spotlight." The 30-year-old dark-haired woman led her friend away from the gawking colleagues. Those who witnessed the spectacle noted how Mandy transformed from a noisy, flirtatious, cheerful blonde into a beaten woman in just a few minutes. Some saw irony or humor in it, others felt pity. Most already suspected the reason for the divorce. "How? I don't understand," Mandy stammered. Everything was just starting to change for the better. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if the embrace gave her more strength. Kit hugged her, trying to comfort her friend. "I don't know, girl," Kit said softly. "Did Eric say anything? Were there any hints that this would happen?" "On the contrary," she managed to say breathlessly, "it was as if we were newlyweds again. I thought he was making up for lost time spent abroad." Kit just shuddered slightly, but Mandy noticed it. Mandy mentally replayed the last 4 months of her marriage. Since Eric had returned home from Afghanistan, their sexual life had been incredible. It was even better than after his return from Iraq 2.5 years ago. He was so passionate and sensual. "Oh God," she thought, "most of the time after that I can barely walk." She smiled sadly, wiping a tear from her eye. "It was so hot and exciting. I mean, after I came back from that business trip last week." Mandy's smile warmed a bit. "Oh God, Kit, Eric just wore me out. We did it so often that I eventually begged him to stop." Mandy's smile disappeared as she looked at her friend's questioning face. "No, nothing happened while I was on that trip. I told you it was all over," she retorted. Kit nodded, but did not smile. "When was the last time Eric just held you, or just kissed and touched you? Sweetheart, when was the last time he made love to you tenderly?" She sat stunned, looking questioningly at Kit. "What?" With a determined sigh, Kit looked at her friend before continuing. "Mandy," she asked directly, "was he making love to you, or was it just sex?" Mandy covered her face with her hands and sobbed deeply. "But why? Why did he do it?" She pondered, then suddenly froze. No, he couldn't know, could he? Slowly lifting her head, she was horrified. "Oh God, Kit," she whispered, "he knows. Oh God, please no, please, no." Tears filled Kit's eyes as she hugged her crying friend. She knew Eric quite well, and if he really knew, it was terrible. Eric nodded, listening on the cell phone. "Thank you, sir," he finally said, after hearing that the packages with photographs and legal documents had been delivered to his wife. Hanging up the phone, he shifted his attention to the laptop. With a simple click, he initiated a process that would forever change the life of his unfaithful wife. She would remember this for the rest of her life, he thought, picking up the phone and dialing a number. "Hello, this is the HR department," a pleasant young voice answered. "How can I help?" "Mr. Davis, please," Eric said coldly. "This is Eric Black." "Oh, Mr. Black," the woman quickly replied. "Let me transfer you." A few seconds later, Eric was speaking to a man who rarely smiled. The conversation was brief. Neither raised their voice, but the hostility was unmistakable. After ending the call, Eric sighed deeply. Looking at the call log on his phone, he saw that his wife had called him 5 times already. Not yet, he thought, trying to calm himself, not yet. There was a sharp knock at the conference room door. When Kit opened it, she immediately recognized the 3 people standing in front of her. The first was a well-dressed elderly man named Simon Samuels, vice president and head of their branch. Behind him stood the imposing John Davis, the director of human resources. Kit couldn't help but notice that Mr. Davis's face was bright red, and she could swear she saw heat emanating from his face. Behind them stood Anna Prescott, the office manager and boss of both Mandy and Kit. "Miss Garnett, we need to speak with Miss Black," Mr. Samuels said grimly. "Thank you for your help, but please return to your desk." All 3 entered the room, and Kit left, carefully closing the door behind her. "Miss Black, we have a problem," Samuels began. Mandy quickly made her way to the parking lot, trying not to trip. She tightly held the thick paper envelope that Mr. Davis had given her. Inside were photographs, terrible photographs of her and Sean Thompson, the business manager from the third floor. Mr. Davis briefly recounted his conversation with Eric. Eric had threatened to expose the fact that the company had not adhered to the code of conduct. He told Mr. Davis that he would discuss it with his soon-to-be ex-wife at home before deciding whether to take any legal action. Mr. Davis informed her that they would meet with Sean next time, but that she must go home and talk to her husband before this gets out of control. He also told her that they would all sit down with her and discuss her future at the company tomorrow, after she meets with her husband. Mandy found it hard to locate her car because she was still crying heavily. The bright sunlight reflected off the cars, making them a bit more difficult to identify. However, her car wasn't that hard to find. A large black Hyundai Santa Fe was not easy to hide. Mandy climbed into it, recalling the arguments that had led to Eric finally agreeing to lease the car for her. He had given in just before leaving for Afghanistan. She wiped her eyes, put on sunglasses, and headed home. A man in an old Chevrolet sedan parked nearby picked up the phone. "Thank you, Bob," Eric said calmly. "No, that's everything. Please tell Ron that you guys did a great job and deserve a bonus. Thanks again. Goodbye." Looking at his laptop, Eric sighed again. One more call, he thought, just one more, and there would be no turning back. But why should he even want to return? All that was left was an unfaithful wife who had torn out his heart, and a shattered marriage that he could never put back together. Eric shook his head and took out a prepaid mobile phone. He quickly dialed a number and waited. The first ring, the second ring, the third ring, a soft click, and then silence. Eric sat emotionless, staring at the live stream on his laptop. Finally, after a few minutes, a tear rolled down his cheek. Mandy maneuvered the large SUV onto the highway and groaned. She hoped to avoid rush hour traffic. She punched the steering wheel. At this rate, she knew her usual 30-minute drive would take over an hour. She thought about her marriage, about how unlikely it was that she could save anything from it. Eric had learned of her affair. Before Iraq, he might have forgiven her, but not now. The photos had been taken while he was in Afghanistan. She sobbed, realizing what he must be thinking. Although the chances were slim, she had to try to save their marriage simply because she still loved Eric. Funny way to show it, right? She reproached herself. She had cheated on him not just once, but both times he had been overseas serving his country. She quickly shook her head as if trying to dispel the guilt and shame, but the tears flowed again. Trust does not come easily to Eric. His childhood was difficult. His father abandoned him and his mother when he was young, and his mother was an alcoholic. In the 5 years that they had been married, Mandy had only seen his mother twice. Once at their wedding and once when their son was born. It took him years to trust Mandy. When they met in college, she knew he was a soldier. She thought she had accepted this. He had already served 2 years and was on his way to earning an engineering degree. They dated for a year before Eric proposed. She still remembered her father's reaction. "No, Mandy, this has nothing to do with Eric," her father said. "I think you'll make an excellent husband. It's more about you. I don't think you'll make a good military wife. Don't be upset, dear, but it's damn hard to be a good husband or wife when your spouse is away for a year." Mike Lomax, Mandy's father, had served in the Navy for 4 years when Mandy was little. She still remembered the arguments her parents got into during that time. She always knew that times were tough for her and her mother, and he didn't want that for his little girl. "You were right, Dad," Mandy snorted and shook her head. "You were so right. I turned out to be a terrible soldier's wife." They bought a very nice starter home, and Eric landed a good engineering job. Life seemed so promising, and then Uncle Sam called. When Eric found out about his deployment, she mercilessly scolded him for leaving her. To top it off, when Eric went to Iraq, she was already 4 months pregnant. Mandy wiped her eyes as she navigated through the stream of cars. She remembered the loneliness she felt, continuing to live without Eric. Of course, her mom and dad did everything they could to help, but the sleepless nights alone consumed her. She needed Eric to hold her all this time, to hear his voice whispering that everything would be okay, but he wasn't there. She realized she was being selfish. But it didn't make the nights any less cold and lonely. Her mother moved in during the last month before the baby was born, and that helped a little. Mandy and her mother Lisa had a very close relationship in most areas. Their personalities were so alike that they seemed more like best friends than mother and daughter. However, there were some things her mother simply didn't want to talk about. The details of her marriage at the time when her husband was serving in the Navy were one of those topics. Whenever Mandy tried to steer the conversation that way, her mother would become very upset. Eric returned home the day after Randy was born. For a moment, Mandy felt that they had become a real family, but it didn't last long. He left again after just 10 days, and she was alone once more. Her mother saw some signs and pleaded with her not to succumb to them. She constantly spoke of the damage one mistake could cause to so many people's lives. Of course, she wouldn't go into details, but Mandy suspected that her father might have had an affair. They were always nice and polite to each other, even friendly, but never passionate. It was more like they were friends living in the same house. Mandy remembered how she struggled with depression and loneliness for several months after giving birth. Returning to work initially helped. Then she was assigned to a project with Sean Thompson. Where Eric had a rugged, boy-next-door charm, Sean could have been a male model. His soft baritone and beautiful smile made Mandy's heart skip a beat every time he entered the room. He carried himself with such confidence and made such an impression. She knew he was married to an attractive, wealthy socialite from New York. They had moved to the area just a couple of years ago with their children. She had even met his wife at a party once. She was beautiful, in a cosmetic sense, and her personality was perfect for one of those housewife reality shows. But that only made Sean even more thrilling. Just a month after they started working together, she succumbed to temptation. Succumbed? She grimaced. That's nonsense. I flirted with him. A short 2-day business trip with the project team provided an opportunity to turn that flirtation into a full-fledged affair. They met a few more times, but she ended it shortly before Eric returned home. When Eric came back, he was different. The carefree, country part of him seemed to have died. She knew his tour had been hard and that he had lost several close friends while there. She even remembered his call the day after the worst had happened. The Humvee in front of him had hit an improvised explosive device, killing 3 of his friends and injuring another. Eric took it hard. Mandy remembered letting him cry on the phone because there was little she could say to comfort him. She even choked up telling him how much she loved and missed him, mostly because she really meant it, but partly because of her shame for being with Sean just 5 days earlier. For the first few months after his return, she simply held Eric, trying to bring him back to his old self. She had no doubt she loved him, and her affair with Sean was just a season of weakness. Then, just when everything seemed to be going so well again, he received orders for deployment in Afghanistan. She was devastated. Unsurprisingly, 2 months after his departure, she found herself back in Sean's arms. She knew there was no excuse, but ultimately loneliness and fear overcame her guilt. She pursued Sean again, and it took all her charm to lure him away from the succubus from the marketing department, with whom he had started socializing after their affair had ended. She felt her face flush with shame for what she had done. Of course, you're ashamed, but that didn't stop you, did it? Mandy scolded herself. She tried to hold back her tears but couldn't, feeling a surge of self-loathing with each new tear. Sean spent several weekends at her house. He even managed to persuade her to participate in another project. For a moment, Mandy even considered leaving Eric. Then reality set in. She, Randy, and her parents went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to meet Eric when he returned for R&R. The trip there was tense, to say the least. Mandy was sure her parents suspected her, but they hadn't confronted her about it yet. Then she saw Eric, and all her worries vanished. When he hugged and kissed her, she remembered why she had married him in the first place. They spent every hour rejuvenating their marriage and strengthening their family. Mandy smiled faintly, remembering that time. Eric was so passionate, so tender, so incredibly loving that she swore to herself at that moment that she would remain faithful to him for the rest of her life. Then Eric told her that he was not going back into the army, that he would be a civilian 4 months after returning from Afghanistan. She cried openly, knowing they would soon be a real family again. Back from Fort Bragg, she cut off all ties with Sean, to his disappointment and anger. She put everything she had into preparing for Eric's return. Mandy even started seeing a doctor about her fears and loneliness. She was diagnosed with clinical depression and began receiving counseling and medication. As the months passed, she felt herself becoming stronger both mentally and emotionally. Every day she vowed to make up for everything by becoming the best wife Eric could ever hope for. Finally, when he returned a few months later, she fulfilled her vows. She denied him nothing, not her body, not her attention, not any part of her love. Although Kid was right, everything was different when Eric came home this time. He was more cautious and did not share his heart as freely. She initially thought it was because of what had happened while he was overseas. Now, she began to realize that he might have already known about her affair, and this thought frightened her. Eric gloomily looked out the window, watching as a light rain fell on the less fortunate. He could tell that the brief shower wouldn't last long. The sun would shine again soon. Not yet, Eric thought, not yet. He stared at a small dot on the laptop screen. For a while, it had been motionless, but now, at last, it moved. His wife's SUV was still stuck in traffic, but it was finally moving forward. With a deep sigh, he looked at the clock. It was time to make a call. Depending on what was said, this might be the last time he spoke to the woman he had deeply loved for the last 6 years of his life. Mandy nearly jerked the steering wheel when her cell phone rang. A quick glance told her it was him. She said a quick prayer, took a deep breath, and answered. Eric? Yes, it's me, he replied. Baby, please, she said, trying to suppress her sobs. Please let me try to explain. Tell you how sorry I am. Darling? Eric? There was only silence. Darling, she said, are you still there? Yes, for now, he replied tersely. Darling, where are you? Are you at home with Randy? I don't have a home, Mandy, he said, his voice betraying pain for just a second. You took care of that. Where are you? It doesn't matter, I'm just waiting. For me? Hope resonated in her voice. Like you waited for me, sweetheart? Mandy couldn't hold back the sobs that stuck in her throat. She had never heard so much pain and anger in his voice before, certainly not directed at her. Eric, please, there's so much I need to say. I screwed up so badly, I know I screwed up, but I need to talk to you, there's so much I need to tell you. I love you, baby, only you. Silence fell on the other end of the line. Okay, Mandy, say what you need to, but I doubt it will change anything. You slept with some other guy while I was gone. Not just once, but many times. So what the hell do you think you can say that would make any difference? Please, Eric, please, for us, don't give up on us until I can see you, please, baby. Not give up? He hissed, like you did with us. No, she screamed into the phone. I know what I've done, but I never gave up on us. I was lonely and scared. I know that's no excuse, but that's how it was. But I still love you and believe in us, darling. I really do. Are you serious? He asked in surprise. Eric paused, wondering if she truly believed what she was saying. You want to say you didn't give up on us when you were with him? And what about how you screamed his name over and over as he hit you? Tell me, how the hell could you even think that doesn't mean, damn it, giving up on us? All she could do was cry, navigating through the traffic, trying to get to him as fast as she could. If only she could meet him face to face, then he would see the remorse she felt, and then, maybe, there would be some hope. He continued bitterly. I finally got proof that my cheating wife slept with someone else while I was in Afghanistan. I guess we're both lucky. I think I could have killed you and that fool if I had found out while I was in the States. After a few seconds, he sighed. Amanda, this is going to be our last conversation. If we get cut off or one of us is put on hold, then it's over for the other. Eric, please, she pleaded. We can see a therapist. We can get through this, baby, we really can. Listen, there are a few things you need to know before you come home. First, I've cleared out all our accounts and transferred all the credit cards. I think you've been cheating on me for the last 3 years, so I'm returning the favor. He ignored her sigh. You can keep the house because I'm sure I can still smell him in our bed. I've packed everything I wanted. It all fit into just one suitcase, so the rest is yours. You can keep your SUV, though I don't know how you'll pay for it, since I suspect you'll be fired tomorrow. I've sent those photos to all your colleagues, family, all our friends, and even our church. Additionally, I've uploaded them and a bunch of videos to several porn sites along with all your information. I suspect you'll become very popular soon. Oh, Eric. No, Mandy sobbed. Why wouldn't you wait until we talked? I did wait, Mandy, he said calmly. I waited 4 months after I got back, but you said nothing. And you wouldn't have said anything if you hadn't been caught, right, baby? What could she say? He was right. As for your little boy toy, Eric smirked, I almost paid him a little visit. But after a few meetings with his wife, I don't think that will be necessary. What a vengeful piece of work. You might want to warn Sean a bit. He'd better run. It seems his wife's family has interesting connections to some very shady people. I'd be surprised if little Sean lasts a year without an accident. She'll probably go after his little night butterflies too. Oh, wait, that includes you, doesn't it? Eric, please, give me a chance to make amends. Mandy's cell phone beeped. Glancing at it, she recognized the number. Eric, Mrs. Johnson from next door is calling. I told you, if we get cut off, it's over. His tone was threatening. Startled, Mandy softly replied, Okay, honey. I was just worried something might have happened to Randy. Randy is fine. Eric's voice softened. He's with me and sleeping soundly. She sighed with relief and switched to voicemail. By the way, about Sean's wife, Victoria, he said calmly, when you two went on your little business trip last week. His words were cut off by another call on Mandy's mobile phone. It was another neighbor. Honey, it's Mrs. Watson. Are you sure Randy is okay? Yes, Randy and I are completely fine, Eric said in such a chilling tone that Mandy began to panic. He smirked. Now about Victoria Thompson. She's really something. While you and that fool were behaving as you have been for the past 3 years, I spent 2 days getting to know his wife more intimately. Mandy choked on her anger and pain caused by her husband's betrayal. Tears began to flow again. I would like to tell you that she's damn better in bed than you, but the truth is, she's not, he declared. Between her whining about everything she wants, and where, how, and when to do it, damn, there's no time for pleasure. I'm sure Sean would agree. So congratulations, Mandy, you've won the award for Best Sex with a Slut. Eric, stop, please, Mandy pleaded, please, just, stop. She began to sob again. She pounded her little fists on the steering wheel, cursing at the surrounding cars as they crawled forward. Gradually, her composure returned, and she wiped away tears of frustration. All right, Eric, she sniffled, you've won. You've had your revenge. You've broken me. She fell silent, waiting for his response, but heard only silence. But I still love you, Eric, she said quietly. There's no excuse for what I did, I know that, but all I'm asking for is a chance to make amends. I'm begging you, please let me explain. There are some medical issues you need to know about. If you ever loved me, please meet with me. Please, baby? Medical reasons? He scoffed. Postpartum depression? Clinical depression? Bipolar disorder? Hell, try post-traumatic stress disorder. In the end, it doesn't matter, does it, Mandy? You still went and had sex with some other guy. How did I find out? It really doesn't matter. Once I did, I hired some people to keep an eye on you. They did a hell of a job too, tapping phones and setting up cameras all over our house, even put one in our bedroom. Oh, Eric, she exclaimed, do you hate me so much that you're capable of all this? Isn't there a shred of love left? Well, there was, he replied quietly, until I saw the video of you with him in our bed. Do you remember that time, Mandy, when Randy walked in on you? Mandy gasped. Oh God, no, please, not that. Eric's voice was tense as he struggled to control his emotions. Imagine what I felt sitting there watching my 2-year-old son call another man, Daddy. Everything I felt for you died right then, when I watched you putting our son to bed with both of you. Damn you, you bastard. Eric's voice shook. I guess I was lucky I didn't know this until we were at Fort Bragg. When I saw it, I was devastated. I almost lost it there, and it's a place where you can't afford to lose it. Eric looked at his laptop and saw that Mandy was almost home. A cruel smile distorted his handsome face as he continued in a cold tone. And as for causing you pain? Amanda, I haven't even started yet. I still have a few. He heard Mandy gasp. Oh, God, she whispered. Surprises, he finished. Mandy pulled her SUV over to the side of the road and watched in horror as flames engulfed what was once their home. As I said, Amanda, the house and everything left in it is yours. Mandy trembled, still disbelieving her eyes. Damn it, Eric, she exclaimed. What have you done? That's a rhetorical question, isn't it? Eric said with a smirk. I was trained to build in combat conditions, Mandy. Doesn't it make sense that I might know something about destruction too? Where's Randy? She screamed. Damn it, Eric, where the hell is my son? Our son is sitting 3 feet from me, asleep in his car seat. So tell me, he taunted, can you see the message I left on our front yard? What? She muttered, what message? Oh God. Eric smirked. I wasn't sure if people could read it from the ground. But the news helicopters, they should enjoy the words, cheating scum, burned into the lawn in front of the house. I wouldn't count on any sympathy from the neighbors, he continued. I've distributed those photos all around the county and paid some teenagers to hand out extra copies around the block. He paused for a few seconds, listening to his wife's sobs. Mandy, perhaps you should consider, Eric said bitterly, where you'll be sleeping tonight and in the near future. I suppose you could sleep in your SUV until they come and repossess it. Or, maybe. No, I doubt Sean will be able to help. I'm sure Victoria is already flaying him alive. I guess the only ones left are your parents. I wonder how your father would feel about having 2 scum living under his roof. What? Mandy sobbed through her tears. Damn it, Mandy, are you that naive? You always told me your father cheated on your mother while he was in the Navy. Hell, it was your mother who cheated on him. Mom? She asked with a trembling voice. Eric laughed cruelly. Oh, hell yes. Your father told me a bit about it after I returned from Iraq. Why do you think he did that, Mandy? Do you think he suspected that his little girl would cheat on her husband just like her mom? But unlike your father, Eric continued, I can't live with a cheating wife for the rest of my life. Maybe he stayed for you, or maybe he still loved her, I don't know, that's his decision. Mine is to start over and hopefully find a woman I can spend the rest of my life with. I'm sure I'll find someone who can love me, be faithful, and be a good mother to Randy. Please, Eric, Mandy sobbed, I can be that wife, just give me another chance to show you. And I am already a good mother to Randy. I'm the only mother he needs. I suppose that's for the court to decide, isn't it? He said calmly. Of course, the fact that I burned down our house and essentially bankrupted us probably won't work in my favor. Eric saw a young man in a t-shirt and baseball cap get out of a taxi and stop on the curb, looking his way. Eric flashed his headlights twice, and the guy headed towards him. All right, Mandy, Eric said calmly, looking at his watch, there are a few more things you need to know, and there isn't much time left, so listen very carefully. First, let your bosses not worry too much about my threats. However, Victoria is filing a similar lawsuit and will likely win. I think the court will really like her and all the evidence I've provided her. As for me, Eric coughed, well, I don't like my chances in court, so I've agreed to a job overseas. I think Randy and I will really like it there. No, Mandy screamed into the phone. You can't take my child. Actually, crap, he's my son, and I can. Don't, Eric, please, she pleaded. He's my son too. Amanda, he said calmly, in a few years, he won't even remember you. But don't worry, I'll send you his photos at Christmas, and we'll even call on Mother's Day and his birthday. Since we won't know where you'll be, we'll just call your parents. Mandy cried bitterly, realizing the hopelessness of her situation. Eric sat for a while, troubled and somewhat disturbed by his own actions. He knew he wasn't going to send her any more photos or make any calls. The thought of her desperately waiting for calls that would never come, and enduring this revenge for many years, was more cruel than he had previously thought. Goodbye, you bastard, he said coldly. I hope you rot in hell. He wiped a tear from his cheek, listening to her hysterical cries pleading for her son, and hung up the phone. Captain Black? Asked the young man in a tank top standing in front of him. Not anymore, Eric smiled weakly. I'm just Eric Black. Well, for a little while longer, at least. The young man smirked and handed him an envelope containing account numbers and passwords for offshore bank accounts where his funds had been transferred, minus, of course, some fees. Here are the passports, photo IDs, and plane tickets for Marcus Gray and his son Michael Gray, the teenager said, smiling. Eric smiled even wider and began to fold his old IDs and 2 SIM cards from his cell phones into a small metal bucket. Smirking, he took a lighter and melted them into a small puddle of blackened plastic. Then he took a small hammer, smashed both phones, and threw the remnants into the bucket. Satisfied with his work, he tossed the bucket into a garbage can. It was better than I could have imagined, Eric smirked. He quickly pulled out the car keys and handed them to the young man. Tell Bob and Ron thanks for the rental, he said quietly. Who? Asked the young man with a broad smile on his face. My apologies, Eric smirked. I must have been mistaken. A few minutes later, Eric was checking his luggage at the airport. He couldn't help but smile, thinking about what awaited him and his son in the coming weeks. His contract started only next month, so they planned to spend a couple of weeks on a secluded beach with a charming lieutenant he had met in Afghanistan. They had been just friends then, but now, having confirmed his wife's infidelity, Eric was eager to find out if there might be something more. "Mr. Gray," the person at the check-in counter politely said, "have a wonderful flight with your son." Marcus Gray and his son walked through the lobby and began a new life.